Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, I'm here with University of Calgary economist Lindsay Tedds, and I figured we would have a quick chat about last week's fall economic statement. The government is trying to position itself as more fiscally prudent. We'll see if that's the case, but there's a few other things in there that Lindsay in particular had some feelings about. So, Lindsay, why don't we start with just the general overview, and then we'll get into the stuff that's really kind of got to you.
The bugaboos. Yeah, I mean, so when Minister Freeland was walking into the House and there was that, that usual pose with the fiscal update, my first reaction was, oh, goody, it's thin. It was a very thin document, which is really different than what we've been seeing over the last few years during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So, it gives you a sense that it's actually feasible to read it, right? It's not 700, 800 pages. This is something that you can read. And there's a lot of really, really good information in there about, where we are, the confidence interval with how the economy is proceeding. They forecasted a soft landing, plus a little bit of a harder landing, but not a hard landing.
Yeah.
Canada's in a very different place than a lot of other countries. And then, of course, the next day, job numbers came out that exceeded expectations. So
yeah, like 10 times the expectation.
10 times the expectation. Yeah. So the labor market is still really, really hot, although it seems like we can't then decide to raise wages as one would predict using a market.
And as we're really finding out in Ontario.
As you're really finding out in Ontario, though, I'm glad to see they're back at the bargaining table. Completely unnecessary what happened there. But yeah, I mean, in the end, I will agree it was a prudent budget. And as a result, it has pissed off people on the right and the left. People on the left wanting the federal government to do more in these unprecedented times. Well, not unprecedented, but in modern memory regarding inflation. And then the right just wants tax cuts, both of which can exacerbate the problems that we're seeing in the market, which is not to say, right, we shouldn't be doing targeted programs, and we are. The GST HST double up credit is a pretty important one. That's up to more than $400 in bank accounts as of last Friday for individuals who qualify for the maximum amount. And they have that rental thing, which I've never really wrapped my head around, but I can never
it's based on a specific support program, so it's just increasing that specific support program.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it is, in fact, a pretty boring fiscal update. And I know some people have called it a mini budget. I wouldn't call it a mini budget. There was not much in there in terms of new spending. But the one area that I think that we need to ensure that we keep understanding, and I know Trevor Tim has been really good at putting these graphs out. He's got way more patience than I do. Inflation is majority the result of supply chain problems and the price of oil and gas, right?
Yeah.
And so
I would add in there climate-related food production.
Absolutely, climate-related food production. Our time of relying on California is going the way of the dodo bird for sure.
Yeah.
And these are things that we absolutely have to think about. Now, food prices for me have bit hard. I would say our grocery budget has doubled, but I'm not going to cancel my Disney subscription because, when I have a 9-year-old, and that's not in the realm of what some changes that people have to adjust to.
And why would you cancel it when Andor is so good?
Well, see, it's my son and my husband who watch all the Marvel and stuff like that. I've moved on to. I've been watching Below Deck. I have to admit, that's my little escapism. But anyway, the things we have to keep looking out for is one, the labor market.
Yeah,
we have to let wages adjust. And I'm tired of hearing this idea of, oh no, that's going to be too much of a burden on businesses. If you can't afford your input goods, you should not be in business. And I realize that that's hard for people to hear, but it's true, right? We have a labor shortage, let wages adjust. The fact that we're thinking of bringing in immigrants to take on low-paid jobs that even Canadians are walking away from is highly problematic from a values standpoint.
Yeah.
And I, amongst a lot of other labor economists, looked at that and kind of went, whoa, what are you thinking? You've got to let our market sort itself out before you proceed. But it certainly looks like we're heading in for that soft landing, which is good, because if we have the hard landing, there's no spending for budget 2023.
Yeah.
Budget 2023 is going to have to be a pretty thin document as well in order for this government to maintain its credibility amongst the centrists. I mean, there's no winning over people who continue to want tax cuts, no matter what is going on in the world. I also find it interesting, those same people who talk about tax cuts always want us to be competitive with the United States, but now they're saying, no, you shouldn't be competitive with the United States because their policies are bad. It's interesting how...
Interesting, yeah.
It is interesting how that goes back and forth. So that would be a high level.
With this in mind, you had some particular comments about the changes they were making to the Canada Worker Benefit, and I just wonder if you can explain some of those.
So, I mean, the Canada Worker Benefit, the idea behind it, it has value in terms of providing some tax support to low-wage individuals. Well, it should be to low-wage individuals, but they've decided to means test it on the family, which means if I am a low-wage individual who's married to a high-wage individual, apparently I'm not allowed to have independent income, and not allowed to have support based off of that. And I think that's it's a really repugnant approach to wage subsidies. And it's also one of the reasons why a lot of people are advocating instead for wage adjustments, because the only wage program that we have at the federal level, the Canada Worker Benefit, doesn't work properly. And in particular, it doesn't work for women, and it doesn't work for racialized women. So, I mean, the bugaboo I have with that one is, for years, people like myself have been telling the federal government, individualize it, build it into the TD1 form, give real-time tax relief, and then we can do this reconciliation at tax time. Now what they're going to do is they're going to keep this convoluted. It is the most, we have a lot of complicated programs, and this is like the most complicated program. Okay. Because it's based off of the family. But if the low-wage worker earns between a certain amount, then it can be individualized to some extent. So it's a really it just blows your mind trying to figure out these calculations. But yeah, so now they're going to prepay it. So they're going to use the previous year's income to pay out the benefit for this year, which means it's not going to adjust in real time to income as it fluctuates. Something maybe we should have learned through the pandemic as being an important part of our social safety net. But again, it's not going to adjust in any sort of real time. And then we're waiting on details about who will be required to repay should the prepayment be too high based off of the actual income for the year.
Right.
There's some details, although I love it how they whisper through the back channels and don't actually put anything in writing so that people can actually know what's going on. There's some rumor that if it's more than 50%, you won't have to prepay it. It's just, but no matter what, this is a convoluted system, and it puts CRA into a very interesting position, because this legislation is going to have to be written very, very carefully, because nobody can direct CRA. Right.
They are an arm's length agency.
They are an arm's length agency. They are not subject to political direction, which has its good sides and bad sides. And it really, there is, the way the program is now and the way the program is going to be reformed, There is no way a low-wage worker can actually use that information to adjust their behavior. So anybody who studies this program and says, oh, well, this is the labor supply changes that happen as a result of it, no, you're picking up something else. This is too complicated to understand.
Anything else that you noticed that wasn't in there?
So the Canada Disability Benefit was not in there, not even a mention of it.
Okay.
There is a lot of eyes on this program because of the sheer magnitude of the proportion of the population with disabilities that live in poverty. We have absolutely the legislation is a shell legislation. There's almost nothing in there about what this thing is going to be. And as a result, they are firing up expectations that they cannot meet. And so a concern is that it wasn't mentioned, which means if anything is included in budget 2023, it will be a shadow of the program that people expect, because a real Canada Disability Benefit will cost 10 to 12 billion easily. And so because that's not booked and there's not a lot of flexibility, there's a lot of concern that all is it's going to be is making the disability tax credit refundable.
Right. And I have heard the minister talking about negotiations she's engaged with the provinces, because disability supports are largely a provincial issue. So I am very curious to see what that's going to look like in the coming weeks and or months.
Yeah, and we have one province and at least one territory that don't currently have a disability program. And so there's nothing to piggyback off of. And what happens to them? And one of those territories is Nunavut, where poverty rates are upwards of almost everybody.
Yes.
that lives there, right? And there's going to be significant disabilities up there as well.
And she was also talking particularly about the experience they had in the pandemic with certain provinces. I think Saskatchewan in particular was clawing back benefits that the federal government was providing.
Oh, and Alberta.
And Alberta, of course, yes. Which kind of undermined the programs they were trying to do. So that's something that they're trying to avoid happening for this again, is my understanding based on what the minister said. So
yeah, it's going to be for this program to not be used by certain provinces to reduce expenditures in their social safety net requires a degree of sophistication and understanding of a very complex system of supports for people with disabilities that I'm not convinced that the federal government has. All
right.
Sorry. I should giggle after that one because that's a serious one. Yeah.
For sure. But on that note, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
No, thank you for having me, Dale. It was a pleasure.
All right. And we'll do this soon. Thanks.
Okay.
And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.